Dead Zone Strike by Sascha Schmidt. They told us Glacis 4 was frozen solid, but that was wrong. Nothing that moves and kills that efficiently is solid. The first thing I remember is the sound inside the suit, the small mechanical rhythm in my right knee actuator. A stutter, then a catch every third step. The sort of fault that gets you killed if you try to sprint, but no one planned on us sprinting. We were meant to go in slow, quiet, and probably not come back. I rode down in the drop shell with 7 others, secured in harness rails that smelled of old sweat and burnt coolant. Impact buffers hummed through my spine. The shell burned blind through the upper storms, everything shuddering around the axis of my chest. No chatter. No visible faces, just 8 status glyphs inside my visor, steady and green. Penal Sapper 731K, attached, expendable. That was me. They had shown us the array from orbit before the jam field came up. A spike of black metal buried in white, surrounded by the dim grid of a settlement. The convergence core under the ice was what mattered, not the tower above that spat energy into the sky. Cut the core, and the beam dies. Leave it intact, and the Directorate cuts the convoy into vapor trails the moment it crosses the firing arc. The convoy was mostly freighters, slow, bloated, full of people with nowhere left to go. Commonwealth citizens, or something close enough that command cared. Every few hours, another set of coordinates came in, projections of where the freighters would be if they held speed. The numbers squeezed closer to the edge of the Directorate's kill zone. Command said we had 1 window, no backup, no second run. The shell hit hard enough to black out my vision for a heartbeat. Then the clamps blew, hull split, and the floor became a spray of crushed ice and wind. We stepped out into the storm. Glacis 4's air hit the suit plates like a physical thing, a constant scraping of frozen ammonia crystals against ceramic. My visor dulled the brightness until the world became a smear of gray and shadow. The gas giant hung swollen and sickly above the horizon, colors smothered by the storm bands. The settlement lay 2 kilometers to the east, a low rash of structures dug into the ice, faint thermal signatures bleeding up through the crust. The squad leader raised one arm, armor thickened and clean compared to mine. The gesture meant move. We shifted into line without a word, 8 shapes pushing against the wind, spread out along an arc. The storm ate the sound of our boots, which I counted as a small mercy. My knee actuator ticked and caught, measuring out the distance. The map in my visor showed a thin thread of a route, traced through weaker sections of the crust. Underneath us, the ice was riddled with hollows and old blast tunnels. The Directorate had been firing the array for months. Each discharge sent cracks through the bedrock, thermal stress carving out caverns where ice refroze in twisted layers. One misstep, and you go through a plate not much thicker than your hand, down into a crevasse no one ever charted. I learned to step where the ice was dull, not bright, where it absorbed light instead of throwing it back. You pick up these rules when the alternative is freefall. At 700 meters from the outer habs, the squad leader halted us behind a shattered ridge. 3 recon drones left their harness mounts, crusted hulls unfolding thin legs. They scuttled over the edge and went low, hugging the surface, optics feeding into our visors. The settlement resolved into crisp monochrome. Hollow dwellings looked like any frontier digs, low domes, half-sunken modules, heat exchangers breathing steam into the cold. Directorate watchtowers were the only clean lines, stabbing up through the haze, each carrying antenna arrays and gun clusters. Between them moved the local workforce. The hollows wore gray thermal wraps and simple mask rigs, engineered bone structure, standard frontier labor prints, broader shoulders, denser muscle, thinner reproductive capacity. Officially sterile, cheaper that way, disposable in the long term and controllable. Unofficially, command briefed us. Some of them had started having children. That was the other objective. Not written in my orders, but present in the way the officer's eyes settled on me when he mentioned it. The Commonwealth did not like the idea of a directorate slave caste breeding itself into a new population under enemy doctrine. Destroy the array, yes. Extract any cooperative hollows if possible. If not, leave nothing critical behind. The route into the under-ice core ran through them either way. The squad leader pulsed the advance glyph. We moved again, following the recon drones into the settlement's shadow. The storm muffled the watchtowers, wind wrapping them in a low howl. Heat from buried modules seeped into the soles of my boots, subtle, like stepping onto the back of some sleeping machine. The first hollow we passed looked straight at me. Dark eyes behind a scratched visor, frost clinging to the filter ports. No fear, no interest, just a flat measurement of one more armored shape moving through their world, one more temporary violence. The squad leader sent a laser ping to the nearest module door. It flashed acknowledgement in a tight band only our visors could see. Our contact. We slipped inside. The air in the module was barely warmer than outside, but it felt thick compared to the suit's recycled stream. We cycled helmets back just enough to switch to the internal atmosphere. It tasted like uncleaned filters and boiled nutrient paste. Wires ran along the ceiling, tapping power out of the settlement grid. Hollow faces watched from shadowed alcoves. One stepped forward. Shorter than I expected, shoulders still broad, skin sallow under the frostburn. A small scar pattern along the jaw, regular enough to be some series code before they burned off the Directorate brand. Their eyes moved over the squad, paused on the markings that identified me as penal. Then they shifted away, as if that was confirmation of something they already knew. The squad leader gave a brief hand sign, open palm, safe. The hollow responded with a small tilt of the head and turned down a narrow corridor. No words, no exchange of doctrine. Just movement. The storm outside wore away at the walls. We all had other things to do than talk. We followed them deeper. The module linked into an older structure, walls thickened with additional insulation. Flooring changed from prefabricated panels to something carved directly into ice. Temperature dropped. Frost climbed the inner struts. Emergency strips cast low orange light that made everyone look sick. Our guide stopped at a bulkhead. Frost had been scraped away from a keypad, exposing old metal. They pressed 3, then 7, then held a gloved hand against the plate. Heat from their skin, augmented probably, woke the lock. It complained, then opened. What lay beyond was not on our scans. The chamber was a hollow in the ice, wide and low, lit by a few dim lamps strung from cables. People filled it. Adults in gray wraps, smaller shapes clustered near their legs. Kids. Half-sized exoskeleton frames lay disassembled along one wall, as if someone had tried to build protection scaled for smaller bodies and given up. I had seen civilian warrens, refugee camps, and prison blocks. This was different. The silence was heavier. Everyone knew they were illegal in their own system. Every breath was a violation of their design spec. Our guide stepped forward, raised both hands to chest height and made a gesture, fingers spread, touching together. A signal of trust, maybe, or resignation. The squad leader checked the time marker. Our countdown to the convoy's entry into the kill zone ticked down, numbers a slow bleed at the edge of my vision. Then he drew a small cube from his belt and held it up. Not a weapon, a projector. Crude schematics washed over the ice wall, the convergence core, the beam lattice, the access shafts below the settlement. The hollow network had mapped more than Directorate security thought they knew or cared to know. There were red marks on the projection, showing structural weaknesses, coolant lines, and a primary maintenance shaft. That shaft was our path. The hollows watched the display without expression. Only when the leader overlaid a second image, a rough cone of space, the path of the beam and the position of the convoy, did a ripple move through the crowd. A few hands tightened on the shoulders of children. Others just stared. Our guide pointed at the maintenance shaft, then at us, then upward, where the abstracted convoy floated. Their meaning was clear. They would show us the way because they had already decided some things were worse than annihilation. The squad leader nodded once. Then he tabbed the projector off. Time to move. We cycled helmets back on, the suits sealing around our necks. The maintenance shaft entrance lay beneath a service hatch 3 modules away. The hollows funneled us back through curved corridors and up through a narrow stair. My knee actuator stuttered on each step, a reminder that the mechanical parts of me were as compromised as the biological. At the hatch, our guide halted, listening to something we could not hear. Then they pressed an ear to the metal, staying that way for a long breath. When they stepped back, their shoulders had stiffened. Outside, something rumbled, a deeper note under the storm. Directorate Patrol. The squad leaders switched to narrow beam and fed the drone team's new orders. The recon units scuttled forward, their small bodies slipping through vent gaps. My visor mirrored their feeds. A line of armored Directorate troopers advanced through the settlement's main corridor, flanked by 200 drones. Their armor carried the smooth composite sheen of central manufacture, efficient, unadorned. Their weapons were compact rail rifles with integrated thermal sights. They moved as if they had done this sweep 100 times. Behind them, a second line of troopers herded a few hollows at weapon point. Standard intimidation tactic. Make the slaves watch, remind them who had air authority and who did not. The patrol stopped 3 modules away from our position. One trooper gestured, another broke off, heading toward a dwelling. The hunter drones sniffed the air, moving in, searching arcs, sensor masts flexing. We had no room to withdraw and no time to fight. The patrol captain signaled for an all-module search. Troopers began hammering on doors, forcing entry, dragging people out. Comms traffic surged in the local band. Even through the jam haze, bursts of data leaked into our suit systems as static hashes. We watched it happen from behind a hatch that felt thinner every second. One of the penal Marines in our squad shifted his weight, heavy shoulders, shaved head under the helmet. His record chip said he had been violent even before the war. Murder, then mutiny when they tried to send him to asteroid work. I had shared a cell block with his type. If I had to give him a name in my head, it would have been something like Conrad. Command just called him Unit 45B. He tapped the hatch with one gloved finger, then brought his fist to his chest, a brief, sharp motion. I recognized that too, a volunteer's gesture, or a man looking for an end he chose. The squad leader held his gaze for a heartbeat, then passed him a small object from his belt. A simple thing. Black casing, matte, no markings. Microcharge, wide dispersion, tuned for flesh and armor at close quarters. Most of us carried at least one. Unit 45B took it, thumb finding the recessed switch by feel. The squad leader marked a module on our map feed. The troopers would reach it in about 60 seconds. Unit 45B's transponder winked as his path updated. He left without a word. The holo guide stepped aside, letting him move past. Their expression didn't change. We watched his icon move across the local grid, trail cutting through tight corridors, slipping between patrol paths. He knew how to move unseen. Men like him always did. 30 seconds later, his icon merged with a cluster of Directorate tags. A hunter drone keyed in on his suit signature. I saw the moment it registered. His vitals spiked. Then the charge went white on my HUD. The detonation tore through 3 adjacent modules. Drone feeds dissolved in static, external sensors flared and died. Pressure waves ran through the ice under our boots. The storm outside swallowed the sound, but we felt it as a long, low shudder. In the aftermath, Directorate comms spiked into controlled panic. Emergency glyphs flashed, then resolved into commands. Perimeter lockdown, asset protection priority, search focus narrowed to the blast area. The patrol would crowd toward the blast site. That left other channels thinner. The squad leader pulsed the hatch glyph. Time to move. We dropped into the maintenance shaft. It ran steeply downward, walls ribbed with coolant pipes and cable bundles. Condensation froze in stalactites along the ceilings, breaking off under our weight and smashing against the steps. Suit traction claws dug into ice. My knee actuator groaned, protesting the angle. I gave it more power, watching the battery drain tick down. The shaft turned twice, then opened into a wider corridor cut directly into ancient ice. Light strips flickered along the ceiling, starved for power. The air had the faint chemical tang of coolant leaks and the ozone smell of high-energy systems. We moved in wedge formation now. 2 Marines forward, then me, then the rest. Behind us, our hollow guide and 3 others followed, their steps even and silent. They carried only tools, no visible weapons. Maybe they had ones we couldn't see. The deeper we went, the louder the vibration became. Machines at scale. The convergence core, waking. At 90 meters depth, we hit the first security door. Hardened alloy, triple locked. The squad leader gave me the nod. I dumped my pack, fingers moving to the familiar pattern. 2 shaped charges on the frame, one on the locking hub, wired in staggered time. The inner ice would absorb part of the blast, but we weren't going for clean edges. We just needed a hole big enough to pass. I set a 10-second fuse, stepped back, and braced. The blast pounded the air out of the corridor. Heat slapped the suit plates, then rushed away, vacuum tugging at the seals. Shrapnel thudded into the walls, slowed but not stopped by the ice. When the air equalized, a jagged gap showed where the door had been. We pushed through into controlled territory. The primary control ring encircled the convergence core like a collar. A wide corridor, rooms branching off toward monitoring stations and power control nodes. Thick glass panels along the inner wall gave a view down into the core shaft. The core looked alive. It was not the simple, static geometry of a cannon. It was a web of latticework struts and suspended coils, each wrapped in containment fields. Energy crawled over them in slow, luminous waves, gathering toward a central focusing segment. The whole structure hummed with pressure, like a lung inhaling before a scream. Hollows worked control stations along the ring, their fingers moving over haptics and manual switches. Directorate controllers in clean armor watched from raised platforms. Alert sirens pulsed muted red along the ceiling. Our entrance froze them for a heartbeat. Then everyone moved at once. Directorate troopers brought weapons up. The Marines cut them down with controlled bursts, rail slugs punching clean holes through armor. Hollows dove for cover. A few reached under consoles and dragged out compact pistols, their gestures shaky but determined. It was not a fight in the heroic sense. It was a short exchange of violence under bad lighting. Most of the Directorate personnel died before they could seriously threaten us. A few hollows went down in crossfire, bodies twisted in unnatural angles across their stations. Near the central console, a single man stayed upright. No armor. Lab coats sealed tight at collar and cuffs. Thin face, graying hair. He didn't try to run. He just stood there with his hands slightly raised, as if that would stop kinetic rounds. The squad leader aimed at his chest. Our hollow guide stepped between them, hands spread. The scientist looked from one to the other, then back at the core. His lips moved, shaping words I could not hear. His eyes were fixed on the converging glow. I knew his type. Designers who claimed neutrality. They built things that cut through ships and cities, then told themselves they were ultimately communications devices, energy grids, or research experiments misspent. Their guilt was always theoretical. We didn't have time to dismantle his conscience. The squad leader flagged me and 2 others forward. Demolition priority. We had maybe 15 minutes before the energy curve peaked. After that, any significant structural change could channel the discharge back into the ring. I started laying charges. The convergence core had support struts at 6 primary anchor points around the shaft. Cut 3 in the right sequence and the structure would sag into misalignment, dumping all stored energy into the walls instead of the focus path. That would vaporize most of the inner chamber and probably take out everyone on this ring. but the beam wouldn't fire. I placed shaped charges at the first anchor, adhesive biting into frost-rimmed metal. My hands moved on patterns I had learned in a prison quarry and refined in war. Measure, attach, arm, move. Behind me, the core's hum climbed in pitch. When I turned toward the second anchor, I saw the hollows move. They weren't going for weapons. They were going for consoles. Half a dozen threw themselves back into their seats, hands flying over controls. The scientist shouted at them, mouth wide, face pale. They ignored him. 2 focused on the core's alignment grid, rerouting power flow. Another few keyed codes into targeting cylinders. They weren't trying to shut the array down. They were trying to claim it. I looked at the HUD. Outer sensors, filtered through residual line-of-sight feeds from orbit, flashed updated markers. 3 Directorate cruisers had just translated into high orbit. The Commonwealth convoy was still hours out of range. The Hollows had seen the same thing on their scopes that we did. They understood that when this was over, someone would own the skies over their world. They had no reason to trust either side. With the beam under their control, they might shoot at Directorate ships today and Commonwealth tomorrow. No one would be safe, least of all them. The squad leader realized the same thing, a second after I did. He marked the Hollows at the consoles as hostile on the TACnet. Marines swung weapons toward them. Our guide stepped in front of the nearest Marine, hands raised. Their visor turned toward the core, then toward the scientist, then back to the Marine. They gestured sharply at the array, then at the sky. Not for us, for themselves. The Marine hesitated, finger on the trigger. We had no dialogue, no clean way to explain doctrine, only trajectories. It resolved fast. One hollow at a console reached for a control that would have sealed the ring and locked us in with the core. The squad leader shot him through the shoulder. Another tried to reroute power away from our planned collapse zones. A Marine fired a round that took half his head off. The scientist collapsed against a bulkhead, hands over his ears, as if the violence was louder than the core's rising scream. In the confusion, a pistol shot rang out, a different tone. One of the Marines went down, clutching at his neck seal. A hollow with shaking hands stared at the weapon, then at the blood. The squad leader killed him with a single round, then signaled for us to get back to work. The guide stood in the middle of it all, expression hidden, hands slowly lowering. I finished armoring the second anchor. We had 9 minutes left. The third anchor point lay on the far side of the shaft, across a narrow span of plating. Beneath it, the converging energy danced like a pale storm. Static crawled over the railing when I touched it. Halfway across, Glacis 4 reminded us what it was. The entire ring shuddered. Not just a vibration from the core, but a deep tectonic movement. Ice layers beneath the complex shifted under thermal stress. One support column sheared, snapping like a bone. The ring tilted half a degree. The span under my feet cracked. A section tore free and fell toward the glow, dissolving into ionized vapor before it reached the center. I dropped to one knee, both hands grabbing at the exposed rib. My knee actuator screamed as suit servos fought to keep me from following the plating down. For a moment, all I saw was light and the latticework whipping past below, threads of energy thick enough to cut a frigate in half. Sweat froze along my spine. 2 Marines grabbed my harness and hauled me back onto more stable ground. My boots left scorched prints on the metal. The tilt had thrown consoles out of alignment. Hollows and the scientists clung to whatever they could, eyes wide. One of the children from the hidden chamber must have found a way down. I caught a flicker of a small face in a doorway before our guide shoved them back and sealed it. The core's hum rose into a constant, teeth-grinding vibration. I planted the final charges as fast as I dared. Adhesive barely had time to cure before I armed them. The timer window was gone. Any delay risked firing. The original plan had involved remote detonators and a retreat path back up the maintenance shaft, then through the settlement to an extraction pad. We would trigger the charges from a safe distance once we had confirmation that the convoy was nearly in range. That plan died with the sheared support column. Structural readouts from my suit told the truth, even if I didn't want to see it. The ring was sagging toward the core. Another minor quake would send us sliding into the converging beam. The maintenance shaft above had already lost 2 segments. Its integrity dropped with every tremor. The squad leader accessed my detonator settings through the TACnet. He overlaid the structural map on the ring schematic. There was only one path that let the charges do their job without destabilizing the core prematurely. It required manual detonation from a panel that would not survive the first microsecond of collapse. He turned to look at us. His helmet hid his face, but his stance said enough. He reached for his belt, fingers closing on his own microcharge. The guide stopped him. They stepped forward, between him and the detonator box. They looked smaller up close than they had in the chamber. Frost clung to the edges of their visor. Their gloves were scorched at the fingers from years of working too close to overloaded circuits. They raised one hand, fingers spread, then folded them into a fist over their chest. The same gesture Unit 45B had made at the hatch. Volunteer. The squad leader did not argue. There was no time and no shared language to waste on it. He just nodded once and keyed my charges to the manual panel. I watched the guide take their place by the box. They peeled one glove off. Skin underneath was scarred and calloused from cold burns. They laid that bare hand on the trigger pad, testing the contact, then gripped the housing with the other hand to steady themselves. Behind them, the core pulsed. We ran. The maintenance shaft had become a tilted throat. Ice shards slid under our boots, screeching against metal. My knee actuator locked twice each time I slammed it with my fist until the motor coughed back to life. My lungs sucked thin, filtered air. Somewhere ahead, a Marine fell and did not get back up. No one had room to carry extra weight. Halfway up, the world went white behind us. Light knifed through the shaft, even around bends. The core's stored energy, denied its path into the sky, slammed sideways into the structure. Chargers shattered anchor points. The lattice collapsed. A pressure wave punched up the tunnel, lifting us off our feet. The ice around the shaft cracked, then shifted. I remember a sensation of weightlessness, then impact, then nothing. When I came back, my suit alarm was chewing at my ears. Pressure warning, oxygen trace low, structural breach in the left thigh plate. Ice pressed down on my chest. For a second, I thought I had been buried under a glacier. Then a small, rough hand dug at the ice near my face. The hollow child from the doorway stared at me through a cracked mask lens. Behind them, our guide's absence was a physical hole in the air. Another hollow levered a length of twisted metal aside, widening the pocket around my body. A shape in Commonwealth armor crawled closer. One of the Marines, armor scraped and scored. Together, they dragged me out from under what had once been a section of shaft wall. My left leg didn't want to move. The painkillers in the suit had blown out with part of the fluid system, leaving me with raw signals flooding my spine. Above us, Glasses 4 rearranged itself. The explosion had chewed a crater out of the settlement center. The beam tower was gone, replaced by a plume of steam and vaporized metal. Fractured ice plates jutted into the air at odd angles, outlines blurred by the still falling ammonia crystals. The storm swallowed the sound, but the sky bore scars, diffuse auroras where residual energy crawled along the upper atmosphere. The Directorate cruisers in orbit shifted vector. They had just lost their ground weapon and a big piece at their garrison. Commonwealth Command flooded the local bands with narrow beams, trying to confirm the convoy's safety. I caught only fragments through the jam haze, but it was enough. The convoy had passed the edge of the original firing arc half a minute before the core collapsed. They were alive, for now. The hollows didn't cheer. They just gathered their children and whatever they could scrape from the wreckage, then began moving away from the crater into the outer modules that still had life support. More Directorate ships would come. Maybe Commonwealth ships too. Either way, Glacis 4's surface had become a liability. Our guide was gone. The detonator box near the core had melted into slag before any residual energy could reach the surface. There would be no body to find, only the memory of a bare hand on cold metal, a scarred palm pressed to a choice. Extraction came later. A battered shuttle threaded down through the clearing weather, piloted by someone whose hands shook more than mine. They took the surviving Marines and me aboard, along with a handful of hollows and their children who had decided that leaving with us was less uncertain than staying. Others slipped away into the cracks, ghosts in their own world. I passed out twice on the way up, once when they tried to cut my suit away from my leg. The second time when the gravity switched and my head forgot which way was down. Now I'm lying in a medical rack on a ship they say is safe for the moment. My left leg is mostly metal and printed bone, wrapped in dressings that smell like antiseptic and burned flesh. My lungs hurt less. They say they scraped out some of the old scars while they were in there. They tell me the operation was a success. The convoy docked. Most ships made it. Command logged Glacis 4 as a contested world with compromised infrastructure. The Directorate cruisers pulled back after a brief exchange with Commonwealth escorts. The beam array is listed as destroyed. They also tell me I have one more major operation to survive before my sentence becomes something less permanent. That's a number on a screen. Numbers don't bleed. People do. When I close my eyes, I don't see the convoy. I don't see the cruisers or the strategic maps they showed us in briefing. I see the core collapsing in on itself, light folding, metal turning to dust. I feel the tug on my harness as Unit 45B walked toward his own blast, and the roughness of a hollow's hand as they drag me out of the ice. Most of all, I see a gloveless hand resting on a detonator pad, fingers steady despite the tremor underfoot. Their children pressed behind a sealed door. No doctrine attached, no anthem, just choices in a narrow corridor under old ice. They told us Glacis 4 was frozen solid. It wasn't. It was cracked all the way through, full of things pushing against the weight above them. We just gave it a new fault line. The end.